It's good, mate. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki whangarei takiwā kui, rua tukau ngā ono, November, I've forgotten how to reo Māori November. But a very warm welcome to you all to our meeting, our November Council meeting. I'm organising the meeting in Karakia. So I'm going to look to our Chief Executive and see if he's going to... Actually, I should have asked our birthday boy to... Yes! An auspicious day. Congratulations, Councillor Connaught, on your reaching the great age of 21, no?
35.
35.
And going to start paying rates. Yes. Be careful, Nick, you're getting very close to
So
being
we will
middle-aged.
open our meeting with a karakia.
No tata, tui te ranga, tui rao, tui te nako ka kia tatu ki tai, kia kimiha, kia uwha, rapua, te maramatanga, te mohi, oranga, kihe wa mauri ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Thank you. Councillors, a reminder that if there are any items on the agenda today for which you have interest, please declare those at the beginning of the items. We have no apologies today, full house. So we will move firstly to our public forum. We have two speakers today for our public forum. Our first speaker is David Lowry, and David is going to be speaking to us on the barriers to control use of vehicles on beaches. I also believe that he's very kindly produced these booklets for us with the presentation that he has. So David, in our public forum, you'll be well aware we have a 5-minute slot for each of the speakers. So I will hand over to you and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. The main focus of this will be around local wildlife refuge. You can see on the map that the refuge is in purple and extends about a kilometre north of the river mouth. But I'm only sort of looking at the first couple hundred metres. This is about 2017, 2018. Same again, if you was a dotterel, if you came home to that every night, where would you make your home? Where would you raise your young? And this is the way the wildlife refuge has been abused in the recent history. This fence went up, it caused a bit of a controversy that happened over it was incremental. When the fence was up, you had virtually a pristine beach. Before it was up, it was just a total mess. The beach was extended to Meanway Water Springs, or close to there, because vehicles were just driving around and bringing their dogs into the wildlife refuge and trampling the place. You can see in that photograph there where it's been stirred up. But there's a vehicle right down the very end. And you can see where the vehicle's been turning around. What that shows is the level of disturbance on the beach. And if that fence wasn't there, that disturbance would have been right in the nesting area. This photo shows there's been some leakage. There's a track going through the fence near the water there. And when the vehicles were going around the fence, you can see a track, and at the base of those flax stalks there's some dotterel eggs. They're in the middle of that set of tracks there. The nest had to be shifted into a secure zone. These the chick hatched. A month later, this vehicle turned up. Really nice people, you know, grandpa, grandma, grandkids, and Jack Russell, and that was the last day the chick was seen. There's some footprints there where you can see where there's been a bit of a scuffle. You can see dog footprints and chick footprints. On the right-hand side, you can see a whole lot of dog footprints on the north side of the vehicle fence. The idea of the vehicle fence was to create a buffer zone between the nesting area and the vehicles, because dogs usually hang around vehicles. Another little story here, 2 eggs of a oyster catcher. They had to sort of go across this traffic area, and that was the result. After about 3 days, that little chick was staggering around, and it died. And from the blood coming out of its mouth, you can see it's very likely internal injuries. Why vehicle barriers on the beach? Nothing else has been shown to be effective. It's a 24/7 problem, and barriers are cheaper than employing security firms. Barriers are safer. Acts of violence against barriers are easily repaired at little cost. Quite often come across hostile people. Why does action need to be taken? Well, it's not just about the refuge. The whole beach is being wrecked. It's bringing destructive behaviour into protected areas, and also we need to comply with the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. There's vehicles just going up and down the dunes there. That rapidly becomes like this. Well, maybe 5 or 6 years down the track, and that gives access into the dunes and further damage. You get these blowouts occurring. There's 3 major blowouts on the beach already. People call them gaps. And the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement says we should be preserving the natural character. It's not really happening. We should be protecting the indigenous biodiversity. It's not happening. And with the Treaty of Waitangi, and this is in the back dunes, there's very likely archaeological sites there that should be protected, and they're not being protected. Other hazards, there's dumping rubbish here, as a tyre has been burnt on pallets. That can only arrive in vehicles. The rusty nails, there's hundreds of rusty nails there. There's the toxic ash from the tyre and all the wire. Also vehicles bring chainsaws for cutting up driftwood. The driftwood's actually really important for sheltering the creatures. They also use vehicles for dragging driftwood out of the nesting areas for bonfires. New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, vehicle access, that says that control the use of vehicles apart from emergency vehicles on beaches, foreshore and seabed, and just public land where damage to dune or geological systems is processed, that's happening. Harm to ecological systems, indigenous flora, that's happening. Marine mammal and bird habitats and breeding areas, that's happening. Danger to other beach users, yes. Disturbance to... And at the bottom it says identify areas and where and times when recreation and vehicular use foreshore and seabed may be permitted with or without restriction to this type of vehicle without likelihood of any of A to G. It's all happening. It's all in a dreadful condition and it all needs to be attended to. The use of vehicles having an effect on the coastal environment. Well, you've got the resource management definition of effect. It certainly is. You've got 2 chicks here. They have to navigate that to get down to the water's edge, and that's how that little chick got crushed. Clusters of these access ways, these illegal access ways onto the dunes. When you get clusters of them and they blow out, they form massive blowouts, and we're really meant to be under matters of national importance, preservation of the natural character of the coastline environment, including coastal margins, blah blah. That's not really being addressed, and it needs to be. Currently, we're smashing the dunes, and there's simple low-cost fixes. Lanes Beach has got wooden bollards, and at Pappit's Road near Blacksmith's Creek in One Tree Point, we've got these concrete-filled galvanised steel tubes. They'll be cheap and effective. And that's basically it. Any questions?
Thank you, David. Councillors, any questions for clarification from David?
Through the chair, I'd like to ask what the council could learn from your experience with vehicle barriers.
The vehicle barriers change people's behaviour. Once they come to a place, find they can't go there, The initial response is angry, I'll try to wreck it, but it's very easy to sort of replace it or fix it up. Eventually, they will go away. I found that 2 or 3 fences actually helps them get through the first fence, come to the second fence, and think, oh God. And then they get to the third fence, and it's just too much work. The reason why they take the vehicles down to the beach is they don't want to walk. So if you make it a little bit more difficult for them, they won't bother going there.
And councillors, just a reminder that in a public forum, it is just for members of the public to be able to come and present for a limited time period and raise issues, which David has done today, and we then will follow up on that.
Yeah, and I'd like to see the council support any initiatives to put vehicle barriers on the beach. But we'll have to have the consultation with Papahara Kekiti Trust Board. Any other?
Thank you very much, David, for your presentation and also for providing us with this material. I appreciate it. Councillors, our next speaker in the public forum is Brian May. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Your Worship, councillors, members of the public, good morning. I'd like to address the subject of legal fees by Mr Matthias, who represents WDC, namely the Dyberg report. Ms Dyberg's report, the cost was $29,000, and the whole report cost $108,000. $68,000 approximately going to Mr Matthias's legal firm for a half-baked summary of which the Ombudsman didn't have the balls to put together. Totally unacceptable. So I asked the question, is it time to engage another legal firm to represent WDC? The Daisley Quarry case rolls on in the courts as WDC tries to legally and financially cripple these ratepayers. Well done, very person at WDC. Could I have a show of hands from councillors who are familiar with this court action by WDC? Who knows about the Daisley case? How many of them?
Brian, that's probably an inappropriate question to ask in this forum.
Well, I've got one person knows about this.
No, that's not an indication of how many people know about it, but it's an inappropriate question to ask in a public forum.
What are you going to do about it? Yes, it's very easy to spend other people's money. I'll put out a challenge to Nicholas Connor to quote online postings, who is my ward councillor for where I live. If this petition is signed and brought before council, those who are signing it are directly costing ratepayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. That was on the post. Please ask for a fully unredacted copy of the Dyberg report for myself and the public to view, as we have wasted $108,000 on this report. If you're so concerned about wasting money. Whangarei District Council is one of the most honest, open and transparent councils in New Zealand. Quote, public meeting, Deputy Mayor on record approximately 3 years ago. So WDC, come clean, release the skeleton in the cupboard. What a not totally good conduct for WDC to be seen conducting. So Mr Furlong, I would say you have fallen short in your duty as CEO in these 2 cases. Suggest you look at Section 14 of the Local Government Act 2002. As a ratepayer, I suggest you resign. Have fallen well short in your duties to ratepayers of Whangarei. We are not walking at POS machines, as some council staff seem to think. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Any
you, Brian.
questions?
I will, however, ask that addressing the Chief Executive in that manner, you're addressing the council laws. So if in future, in your public forum, which we always accept that you have a right to come and speak to us, that you limit your address and your discussion to things that are relevant to the council laws.
It is
I
involving
think
the
it's,
CEO.
no, Mr May, you did mention in your presentation something specifically about the Chief Executive that was inappropriate.
We have discussed this with the CEO. Nothing's been done.
This
So what does it take to get
It's a
something done
public
around here?
forum for the council laws to have things raised to them that are relevant to the council laws. So I'll just caution you on that particular aspect of your presentation today. Thank
Well, I'll
you.
put it to you, you're going to release the diabetic report or not? What are you hiding?
As you're well aware, that's been through many processes, and you're well aware of the processes that have gone into that report
I sure
and the
am.
release of it.
So you better come clean, okay?
Thank you, Mr. May. Thank you, councillors. That brings to a conclusion the public forum of our meeting today. Item 5.1 has been withdrawn, and my understanding is that it will come to a future council meeting. And just on other topics of housekeeping, there will be another two supplementary confidential reports, 1.4 and 1.5. But they will be addressed in the confidential portion of the meeting, but just highlighting that they will come at the end of this meeting today. Brings us to item 6.1, the minutes of our meeting from Thursday the 22nd of October, page 24 of our agenda. Something which includes a confidential portion of those minutes. True and correct record, Councillor Cockerell is moving and Councillor Peters is seconding. Are there any corrections or amendments required to those minutes? If not, I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Those against? Carried. Item 6.2, the minutes of our meeting held on Tuesday the 3rd of November. There were no public bits to the business, so the minutes are as they are. Councillor Cutfield is moving that they are true and correct record of those minutes of the meeting. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Peters is seconding. Any corrections required? No, I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. Item 7.1, decision making over the 2020-21 Christmas recess. We've got a number of recommendations on page 34. Do I have a mover for those recommendations? Thank you, Tracy. Councillor Pulse is moving and Councillor Dean is seconding. Any discussion?
Your worship, is standard practice to make sure everybody's covered over that Christmas period, and to do it early gives everyone notice that people are in place to do these jobs. Simple with that.
So any further discussion? Just to reassure you, I'm not planning on going anywhere. I'm going to Christmas Eve here, but just in case I do. Councillor Fong.
Yes, just on number 5, where it designates me if there's a chance that you are unavailable due to extreme circumstances. It's when I realized this originally, how the weight of this decision was on it, I was like, well, but I also know that there's a great team behind the rest of it as well to be able to support me in that decision and looking for emergency civil defense. So, thank you.
You're right, it is a tremendous responsibility that we have. Should please let there be no situation happening in our district where we even have to consider a national an emergency, so national emergency. So any further discussion?
Just a bit of right of right.
Councillor Holmes?
Just referring to what Councillor Connor has just mentioned, that is the very reason why I think the newer council should be put in a position like this, because a lot of us have been through the process, and it's really great to see new councils being involved.
I will put the motion. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Item 7.2, adoption of the 2019-20 annual report. Dr. Lisa Helen coming forward. The recommendations on page 36. I will move the recommendations. Councillor Martin is seconding, so that we adopt the annual report and summary annual report for the year ended 30 June 2020 and authorises the Chief Executive to make any minor editing amendments that are required. Councillor Reid has already highlighted that there's a phone number in the document that he would like just updated to reflect a phone number that might get answered if somebody so we will make sure that that is corrected in the final document. So, councillors, this is the report and summary report for the year commencing 1 July 2019, ending 30 June 2020. As you'll know, it was a year of dramatic impact on all of us. And the report shows the things that we had to do as a result of the pandemic that was declared earlier in the year. I'm really proud of the achievements that we have made despite the fact that the year has been so incredibly disrupted. And if you read through the full report, which is much greater than the summary, it was really pleasing to read through the actual reporting on the activities that we, so it starts with our working in detail, and each of the areas show our key achievements. And throughout the document, it just highlights through transport the things that we've done. The next activity is water. And of course, water is something that's a very hot topic with our Three Waters reform, but this is a reflection on what we've done through this financial year in that area, through solid waste. One of the highlights was the introduction of our blue recycled crates for glass, wastewater, stormwater, flood protection, community facilities and services, which includes parks and recreation, and our libraries, community property, community development, venues and events, and of course governance and strategy, democracy and assurance. It also reports on the targets and the measures that we are required to report on. Some of them are statutory measures, some of them are measures that we have put in place ourselves. And you'll notice that not all of our targets were met this year. Some for reasons beyond our control, and some where we almost made it. 99% still doesn't cut the mustard. I wish it did. Our report has been through the independent auditors, and they have signed it off. And today we have the pleasure of finally signing off those documents. This is a tremendous amount of work done by the team to get the report done. In this disrupted year. Normally we would like to get our annual reports completed earlier than November, but we do understand the reasons why that has been. So in the financial prudence benchmarks, and our financial targets, the one that we didn't achieve was the balanced budget. And as I say, it wasn't 99%, it was 95%. But it does need to be equal or greater than 100%, which can't be more than 100%. So that was the only financial target that was missed. And all of these reported on, and you'll see some of the pleasing things, so the rates affordability. Now clearly we had to do something dramatic with the resetting of the rates, the reset, recovery and restart. And you'll see all through the financial reports, so the impact of COVID that word comes up right throughout this document. Then there are the non-financial targets, and again, in the full document on pages 27, 28 and 29 are those significant achievements and in covering our things like the satisfaction survey, our service level performance and also the impacts of COVID-19. So in what's been a pretty tough year, I think we should be proud of what we've achieved, and we're now of course into the next financial year, and we're working very hard. And later in our agenda today we've got reports on the financial status, which shows that our teams are well and truly into the restart process. So all in all, thank you again to the teams for putting together the report, and it's a document that we should all be proud of. I will open it up for debate. Councillor Cockerill.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Look, you've highlighted the good parts, and to be honest, this council has been working very, very hard. I don't think anyone would have not heard disown that. The things I want to just highlight on is the transportation. 25% achieved, 75% unachieved. This is all within the full document, not from the summary. Our community is actually rather disappointed with the way this council has been dealing with its transport, and it's understandably because these are things that they have to deal with and they have to drive on every day to get around this district. So I would like to see a vast improvement on that. I know our staff are working on that and they are trying to get a much better improvement for next year. But it's just something that needs to be acknowledged, that our public are upset with us in relation to transportation, because it is something that they do deal with and interact with every single day.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
I just also similar position to where Brando was just bringing up about the service performance. Although with the performance, how it's set out and how it looks is in large chunks, it doesn't quite show the actual how much we've actually reached on target. Now, although for me, I'm a rubbish person, and my focus was kind of on the solid waste. Even though it shows 0% on there, and to me that says we really need to do better, I also know that the targets were very close to being met. So I appreciate the fact that we have trying the best to do what we can, but we can do better as well. But it just highlights the fact that we need to be working better on our solid waste, as well as the health and bylaws as well, with only a 25% target being reached too. So it's just another thing that the health and of the people that live in this town and looking after the situations that they're in, but the bylaws especially as well, we need to be able to do a lot better. So it's great to see we've got building control, democracy assurance, and all those type of bits and pieces, and all the other areas are quite well, but it's those ones down the bottom we do need to focus on. We do need to make sure that we're doing it right as best as possible. And there always will be complaints. There always will be issues, but we have to do the best we can for the people of Parramatta.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Platform.
Thank you, Worship. Just looking at page 15 or 13, depending on which way your eyes go. One of the things we did with COVID, 50 or 13, Councillor Benny, sorry, and they noticed in the truncated version.
Thank you.
On the agenda.
One of the things we did with COVID was just to put an immediate freeze on staff in terms of replacement. And I think if you look here, you can see our personnel costs were 1.6 million lower than budget. And if you look further down, our other expenses were 3.7 higher than budget due to an increase in professional services, contractors and consultants. So while we may have not employed people on a permanent basis, we then had to, because of the nature of the work we do, we had to then take on other people as contractors, generally because it's short term at a higher rate. So I think for us, for council, it's a real lesson for us in terms of what's important, and actually it's having the right staff in the right place at the right time that's important, and it's actually not really cost effective to not replace and rely on contractors, and I think we know from other experiences that that's not necessarily the right way to go, particularly bringing in people who are there only for the task and don't understand the culture in the organisation and can't contribute therefore in a bigger way. So I thought that was a really interesting lesson for me in terms of really thinking through the consequences of the decisions that you're making, particularly around the people you employ.
Thank you, Councillor Cutforth. Ellen's going to respond to that, but in principle, I agree, and I think that is something that we need to ask our Chief Executive to be checking. Is it a false economy to have? So in principle, I agree, but I think Ellen's probably got another explanation of why that would be.
Thank you, Worship. Response. Look, I totally agree with what you were saying, that not employing staff and being contracted to place them achieve nothing. there are contractors and contractors, and most of the expense here is about contracts associated with projects, which are normal business for us to do. So, for example, we bought professional service into a lot of transportation projects, and that part of the project as opposed to filling in staff gaps. So when we do our coding within our system, we have two different categories for the contractors. One is for those covered vacancies, and one is for contractors as in professional services. So we're very mindful of what you're making, it's totally valid.
Thank you. Well, I take it all back, but I still stand by it.
No, I wouldn't take it all back.
But I still stand by it. As I understand, thank you.
Really good to have that, and perhaps at some future time it would be good to report on that split, so that we can get an understanding, visibility of how how we are employing contractors. That would be really helpful at a future meeting. So thank you for highlighting. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the Chair, following on from Tricia's comments, if there's 1.6 in that budget, we know that the staffing levels are way low and the workload is way high. Perhaps a chief executive might be able to find some leeway in there to employ more people and take some weight off his staff's workload.
Councillor Reid, I'm very confident that the Chief Executive is working hard to ensure that the teams are well resourced. However, there are some time, and the more we add to the work programs, the harder it is. But I agree with you that we need to keep monitoring the performance of the organisation through the Chief Executive and making sure that he's applying the resources appropriately. Councillor Connott, did you have a question?
Yeah. No, I was just checking the paper one. Yep. With the typeface, one thing I noticed that just going through, the capital I is very out of place. I know it's random, but it's just reading through it, and the capital I is just threw it out. Is there a reason that it's a different typeface than the actual rest of the document?
Gosh.
It's random, but
It is random.
It's noticeable, especially on the digital document.
Noted.
Yeah.
Very Chair, look at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's just
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you. I was on the same page as Councillor Cutforth, so I think it's page 13 of the report. So through the Chair, thank you for the report. It's a really good summary of the high level activities. And we have dealt with COVID and we've dealt with a major storm event. And so it's pretty amazing, I think, that we managed to carry on and achieve so much of our activities. I just had a question. When you look at that table, so it speaks to the fact that our vested asset income was higher than budget by $6 million due to the conservative nature of the budget, which is quite a high, a large amount. I was just wondering if staff could speak to that a little bit as to that $6 million, and just talk to that about.
Thanks, Councillor Murphy. Delise, can you respond to that?
Yeah, so through the Chair, the nature of setting a budget for vested assets is very difficult. It's a non-cash item, so that reflects the value of assets that have vested to council at their fair value. So there is some correlation between that and our development contributions, but it's a very hard one to pin down. For the LTP we're currently doing, we've gone back and had a look at the previous 10 years and sort of averaged out an approach to try and get as close as we can to reflect what's happening, but it is very dependent on that development work happening in the district.
Okay. Yeah, it's just interesting reading it, and from someone who isn't on council and hasn't been through all the briefings and workshops that we have. I think it's good to be able to simplify the language as much as possible, so that someone who's looking at this, someone in the community who said, what does that mean? The other question I had was just on the next page, which is that the profit, the 0.9 million cash distribution from the NRLLP partnership. My question was is that just our share of the profit from our own district's operations, or is that the profit from, because we take waste from, the Auckland area and the Far North? And so I'm just wondering, is that profit our share of the profit from the entire operation or just from the Whangarei district?
Through the chair, for the entire operation of the JV.
And are we able to, I'm just interested to know, do we actually, is it broken down, is it able to be broken down further to look at what share of that does come from just our district or not really?
Through the chair, we don't break the profit down into catchments. We know where the flows come from, but they'll be very arbitrary process to allocate the profit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I really believe that we've done pretty well through COVID, and it'll be interesting when all of the other councils are all put together to see how well they've done. But we've got it quite well divided this year, where transportation, when you look at most of that, the lion's share of the 25 cents is subsidy, and some of the other ones. So where the actual rate dollar goes from our district is quite different from what the picture here shows. And we should always remember that the private sector funds the local government and central government, and even our subsidies that come from central government have originated from the private sector. So it's very important that we make sure we have the infrastructure so that that can continue.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Hobbs.
Your Worship, just three pretty minor points really, but it's mainly change in process. What's interesting in personnel, it's always been a practice, and it's always been, I thought, was the unwritten law that we had to show our chief executive salary package in our annual report, and we don't do it this time. We've got a collective.
You do.
No, it's in the collective. It's included with the senior management team.
It's definitely isn't.
Page 138, it says executive leadership team, including the chief executive.
It is definitely a separate that.
Well, I can only go on page 138, I'm reading here.
Page 139.
139.
Yeah, it's definitely separate.
Okay, yes. Well, maybe we should take out the chief executive one on the other side. Should be just senior leadership team.
Again, through the chair, this is a prescribed process. We can't vary from what this is.
Well, we have, excuse me, I've been here, dealt with a few annual reports, and the CEOs always were separate because that's the statute and legislation. You might have it on page 139, but don't include it in with your senior management.
Through the chair, that used to be the case. The legislation changed.
Well, we haven't been informed of that legislation change.
It's been this way for about 5 years now.
Okay, the second point, contingent liabilities. We've got the Hunter Vasa project in contingent liabilities. Up until now, we've grant funded 193, page 193. Up until now, we've granted all things as grants, and so is that sending a signal to us that we've got to watch that? Why is it in the contingent liability?
Through the chair, we are required to consolidate our CCOs into this to give a group view, and all that, the detail of that project and the Art Museum's financials falls in that contingent liability note, so it's reflected the same to councils.
Well, don't want to be picky, but I don't see the other one.
Again, through the chair, this is the approach we've taken since this project started. So we're mirroring what is in the WAM's accounts, as Tilly said, to show the consolidated position of council total exposure to its corporations and CCOs, which we're required to do by law.
Thank you, Councillor Hobbs. Any further discussion? Councillor Cooper.
Talk about the salaries and the staffing position is interesting, isn't it? We spend a lot of time in this chamber questioning staff and listening to reports and the work that they do, and sometimes the comments are fairly robust and pointed even perhaps, but I do believe that's our job. But what we have had highlighted today, thanks to Councillor Cutforth and some of the others, is that the fact that while the report notices that we have achieved most of our targets, it's been done with less staff than in the past. And so perhaps, given that this is a live streaming, it's appropriate to thank the staff for their work for the year. And I just wondered if perhaps we should do that.
You've just done that. Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Just a query from me on the total revenue, total expenses, page 13 of the agenda. So the $3.7 million other expenses higher, does that include legal fees?
Through the chair, will have any variances. There's a more detailed explanation on page 212 of the full report. It doesn't specifically mention legal fees. If it was a significant variance, it would have.
Thank you.
Question, Councillor Bennett? Any further discussion? Councillors, I'll just wrap this up with a right reply. I think it does show that that comment around a summary document and a full document, it's one of the risks of having a summary is that the detail is in the bigger report, and it's unlikely that people are going to go to the effort of looking at the bigger report, but it is available. And you just commented on Honeybuster, for example, there's a very detailed narrative on pages 1, 9, 7, 8 and 9 around that particular project. But it also highlights things like the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency, our airport feasibility project, Building Act claims, including things like the risks around watertight buildings and things, weather tightness. Detail is phenomenal within the larger report, and I hope that you have had a chance to read the full report and refer any of the ratepayer queries to that report. These are incredible documents. I love the annual reports. I'm a bit of an annual report junkie. I go back and I look at where we were in things like how much were the rates, how much was our debt, how many people were in our district, how much capital work have we invested, and just across the spectrum of what we do as an organisation for and on behalf of our ratepayers and our residents of this district. So if you really are bored one day, go back through all the reports and because of the consistency of reporting, you can look at the trends across year on year. And I do keep a little bit of a dossier. I'm a bit of an Excel spreadsheet junkie. Having said that, thank you, Councillor Cooper, for raising thanks to the overall team for a year well done. And despite the fact of not quite meeting some of those targets and getting 84 instead of 87 was frustrating because that means there's a big fat zero when you have a target, but it still shows the effort that's gone in. So I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. That brings us to item 7.3, the Joint Climate Change Adaptation Committee formal appointment of members. With recommendations on page 54. Noting the appointment of Councillor Murphy and Councillor McGuinness, and appointing Delarraine Armstrong and Rosie Wellington as our representatives to the Joint Climate Change Adaptation Committee, the representatives and their alternates. So, we'll go to move for the recommendations. Councillor Cutford has moved, and Councillor Collins has seconded. Councillor Cutford.
Thank you, Worship. I just think it's really timely that we have this, we establish this. I'm really pleased that it's a regional approach. I'm hoping that when the committee meets a minimum of 2 times per year, that their 2 times a year minimum perhaps becomes more than that, and if it is only 2 times, then the devil will be in the quality of the meeting. So I hope that just getting it established, it will start to meet maybe more regularly. Really, really pleased to have Hapu represented officially as part of the committee, and I'm sure that Councillor Murphy, ably assisted by our Deputy Mayor, will do our district proud. And yeah, pleased to work.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Any other discussion? Councillor Peters.
I also am really pleased to see this is set up, and I'd just like to endorse some of the other work of the councillors in the chamber on this issue. For example, last week, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Hulse called together a meeting between and Councillor Deming, called together a meeting between our farmers in our district and the climate change workers in the council, and that, I believe, was one of the most important areas for us to be working in climate adaptation and mitigation, and that sort of conversation really needs to, we need to be part of that. So I'm very excited that many members of our community, of our councillors are interested in this issue, and especially in that relationships between some of the largest landowners in our district and climate work, climate action.
Thank you, Councillor Peters. Any further discussion? Councillor Martin.
Yes, well, I'm okay with forming this committee, but I hope that it's not going to be have tunnel vision, because when we were at the water conference, there was a guy that had a presentation. It wasn't on the floor, but he showed the benefits of planting the marginal strip in cut and carry, so that farmers didn't become uneconomic, keep the stock out, and he's testing the water and everything that's going out there, the carbon that's coming across it, and finding significant improvements from planting it up in trees and stuff and just letting them go down. So we need to keep a very open mind on new initiatives that are coming through. So if that's how this is going to work, then I'm comfortable.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Murphy.
Great to hear about the meeting between farmers and climate change advocates. I'd be really interested to hear more about that. It sounds like a great initiative. I just had a question. At our Northern Ford Together hui, there was a really interesting presentation from Tony Phipps about drought resilience, and there was a suggestion that a working party should be established to look at water management and drought management in Te Tai Taupiko. So I was just wondering, because I mean, obviously there's a massive crossover, drought being one of the main impacts of climate change. So I was just wondering if staff could speak a little bit to how they would see those two working groups coming together and coordinating their work plans. Thank you.
Through the chair. So the water resilience is not an area that our team looks at. I'm not sure if Simon's here in terms of commenting on the work that is being done. What I would say is there certainly is a connection between the two. So in principle it does make sense to join those conversations together, but it's not an area that we're currently focusing on in the strategy team. So.
Good. That's okay. Thank you. I'll follow that up. And I look forward to, I think, our first meeting as an until January or February. Is that correct with the chair?
Through the chair, February at this stage. Continue from February.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you. Councillor Murphy. Councillor Holmes.
Your Worship, just on the terms of reference of this committee, has it been agreed to by the other councils? And if there are changes made to the terms of reference, when will we be notified of it?
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. When do you respond to that?
Through the chair, we're still waiting on a decision from Whanau District Council. and they have been through their equivalent of the Planning and Strategy Committee. They hadn't followed due process, so they needed to go back to the Planning and Strategy Committee and then go through full council to agree to the establishment of this joint committee. So I think they'll be intending to take that item to the December meeting of Whanau District Council. Their agenda is an online meeting. And I haven't seen the decision from their most recent presentation to the Planning and Strategy Committee. I will follow that up. I believe that they're intending to only agree to the establishment of the committee subject to changes to the terms of reference, in particular around formal use of the word appoint as opposed to nominate. So it's important with our language in our report today that we're using the word appoint, and also around the reference to remuneration for hapu members. I believe they're seeking an amendment, or will seek an amendment to essentially having consistency across the districts for hapu remuneration, consistent with the Northern Regional Council's non-elected members policy, which is less than our current amount that we have agreed to through Te Kāriarea and through this forum.
No, the point I made is it's hard to us to endorse something where we don't. Still got a moving target, so as long as we keep an eye on it, it's a pretty good estimation. Thank you. We can understand where you are, but if there are changes made, we need to know about it, and we need to modify our input.
As a member of a joint committee, then any changes would have to go to all members.
I'd just like to add a little bit about the meeting that was on Monday, because hopefully that'll be followed up in other areas as well. It wasn't a meeting between climate advocates and local farmers. It was a meeting between interested local farmers already addressing the situation and our district council staff. And I would like to say that thanks to the way Bernadette, Tony and Hamish conducted that meeting and were empathetic with the needs of the farmers and gathering that information, left me feeling a lot more comfortable about this committee than I was before. So thank you.
Very much so. I agree.
Councillors, I would just like to add, the staff working group for climate adaptation to Tai Tokoro has been in force for quite some time. So this what we're doing today is a governance group with oversight on the work that they are doing. I personally fully endorse the focus on climate change adaptation. It is one of the most critical things that we are addressing for our district and our region at this time and going forward. So having oversight of the actions that can be taken. The point around the water management or drought management, I think, is an operational matter, looking at resilience in that area. Climate change adaptation is more about what can we do to be looking at ensuring that our district is well prepared for and planning for the changes of climate. So having people looking at specifically around the impacts of climate change, and then bringing forward to each of our authorities some recommendations probably for where we can make some changes that will have a positive impact on that is a really good move. I'm pleased to see that we've got membership from each of the 4 councils in the region, and iwi hapu from each of those regions, districts as well. So it's complementary, but just bearing in mind that this is a governance structure over top of the active work that our teams are doing collaboratively around the region is a good thing. Who moved that? Councillor Buckles.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I think you've done the right reply for me. I think you've said everything I wanted to say. I mean, I just think that I'm really pleased, as you say, that it's now been a you like, elevate it to having a governance group. I think that's really important. And I mean, as Northlanders, we know already the impact of extreme weather events, and we know, I think, that they're only getting more, and that is part of the whole climate change picture. And so I'm really pleased to see this being established, and I look forward to it taking a very considered approach that takes into account all the different aspects and interest groups who are involved in this issue. So thank you.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 7.4, the review of our significance and engagement policy. And as Tracy settles into her seat, this is the last time that she'll be speaking to an agenda item to our council. Just noting that Tracy is leaving us, and we thank her for the work that she's done while she's been here. The work on significance and engagement policy is just an indication of the quality and calibre of the work that she's provided for our organisation over her tenure. So we wish you all the very best, but now we can throw a few questions at you. Councillors, we have recommendations on page 58. They're determining that we, etc. There's lots of them. One of the difficulties, of course, of being live streaming is that people who are looking in don't really know what we're discussing. So hopefully in the future we can have something that goes on to the recording that shows the recommendations, and perhaps we'll get techno savvy and have it up on the screen and have some live interaction. But I know that's coming, but I also know that when we've got huge long recommendations, it will take half the meeting to read them out when we've got them in front of us. So hopefully people who are looking in might have copies of their agendas in front of them as well. So the recommendations are on page 58. Do I have a mover for the recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Benny. And Councillor Deeming is seconded. Councillor Benny.
No, I'm fine.
I'll take it that the item has been read, and we have been through quite a process to review this and ensure that the triggers within our policy are reflective of the significance and how we consult with and engage with our community when we do. And you'll note in every agenda item the assessment of whether a decision that we're making triggers the significance of engagement policy. That's not to say that if it doesn't trigger it, that the decision is not significant. But it does say that we as elected members are dealing with decisions that are significant but don't trigger the policy. It is often confusing when you say to somebody, oh, that didn't trigger the policy. They'll go, but it was a significant decision. And we agree. But you'll see on page 67 of the agenda how we determine significance. And you'll also note that a decision is typically considered significant if two or more of those criteria and measures are triggered. So it's, if one's triggered, we can choose to say that we will use the engagement policy, significant engagement, but more often than not, it will be two of those triggers before we then consider what is the appropriate engagement and consultation process. And you'll see in the Appendix 2 is the Community Engagement Guide, and showing that on page 74 of our agenda, or 13 of the policy, what the goals and the types of issues that we would use, different types of engagement through informing, consulting, involving, collaborating, and ultimately empowering. There's also the appendix on the strategic assets, for which they are showing whether or not we are needing to consult. So the policy is a living document, and I know our staff refer to it at all times when they are assessing whether or not a decision triggers the policy. and we also need to be mindful of it every time we're making decisions. Councillor Denny.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Tracy, for guiding us through this document, with which we've done a lot of work and a lot of browbeating while we came to the final conclusion. To me, the most difficult of the criteria is assessing the level of public interest and or impact. Mainly probably because it's so subjective and it's so difficult. It's just like within a council meeting, you have no idea which item is suddenly going to attract the attention of all the councillors and a very long discussion. One that you thought should have just been tick box suddenly takes an hour of discussion. And to me, that's what happens with the public impact and interest. Until they're aware of an item or a project, it's really difficult to gauge the significance of that impact on them. So please forgive us, public, when we get it wrong. It doesn't happen very often, does it?
Councillor Cockburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Tracy. Is this policy retrospective? In other words, if a decision is made by council and then this policy comes into play, does it then take effect on those items?
Good morning, through Your Worship. The policy becomes effective when it's adopted. So as at today, our current 2017 policy applies to decisions made.
But just through you, Madam Chair, again, there's not much, from looking at the previous policy and this policy, there's not like a major change in the document. It's just wording effectively from what I've read through. Is that correct?
Yes, through the Chair, that is correct. There are no material changes to the policy, so the criteria for determining significance haven't changed at all. And really, it's a refresh, to try and make it easier to understand, a more usable and useful document for the public and for staff, and to better reflect some of the commitments, for example, our partnerships with Māori and what the advisory groups told us was important when we engage with them.
So through you, Madam Chair, the question I then come up with is, in relation to our last council meeting where we voted to have Māori boards, does that not affect two of those items there, which is the impact on council direction and also the impact on the public impact and or interest? Does that not then significantly make that a major significant change and therefore should have gone out for public consultation?
As I mentioned before, every item that comes onto the agenda is assessed for whether or not the decision is triggered by the significance and engagement policy. You'll recall in that item around Māori representation, the policy was considered and was not considered to have triggered the policy, so it wasn't required to engage in Tracy's government.
Through the Chair, if I could just comment on that. For that particular process, it's a local electoral act that sets out the process that council must follow. And that is that once council has made a decision, it advertises with the ability for the public to run a petition to demand a poll. So that has its own specific process to allow communities to have their say. And so that sets you the electoral act.
Any further discussion? Councillor Cutler.
Oh, just quickly, I want to thank Tracy for the work she's done. I really like the fact that we've got the Greek translation of democracy at the beginning. I think it's a really nice touch. I haven't actually, unlike Your Worship, I don't go back and check everything through the years because I can't find it in the files of council stuff I've got on my desk. But I do know it's been simplified in terms of language. And the other thing I think is what we can learn from this is a document that is about engaging with our community, or it's about how we work with our community. Is just things like layout, how important things like layout are in terms of making something more attractive, more accessible, more legible. So while I don't think that Tracy's a layout queen, I really appreciate the fact that she has worked with whoever to do that and has thought about that. So thank you for that.
Through the Chair, yes, that's our graphics department.
Great team, great work. Any further discussion? I will put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7.5, contract 15071, traffic and pedestrian signal maintenance. The recommendation is on page 82. Kelvin. Do I have a move for the recommendation?
Yeah.
Councillor Martin is moving. And Councillor Reid is second. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of another one of the COVID ones that sort of snuck up on us. The main point of it is that the pedestrian and traffic contract aligns with new technical requirements. We need 6 months to get it done because of COVID, so I think it's just a common sense thing for them to get it all ready. So, Kelvin, maybe you could go into a bit more detail, but that really is the basis of it. We're just extending the contract until it can be gone through.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Kelvin, did you want to add to that?
Through the chair, I think Councillor Martin summed it up nicely. And this is within existing budgets, so it's an extension of time to allow that process to occur.
I note that this is one of the longest serving contractors in this area, and their skill and expertise is unrivaled, really. So having the confidence in extending the contract, but we will be putting it out to public tender, and it will be interesting to see if anybody puts their hand up to say we can do it better than Curry's. Councillor Cockburn.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just for a point of clarification, I'm realising out in the public they do have a bit of an issue with our traffic lights and things. And just for clarification, our contractor who we've got there is not actually in charge of the signalling and changing of that. They are just doing a job which is directly from the staff. That's correct.
Kelvin?
Through the chair, yes.
So we need to be well aware that sometimes the guys who are working out there aren't actually the ones causing the issues and trying to fix them.
Yes, indeed. Any further discussion? I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 8.1, financial report for the 4 months ending 31 October 2020. The recommendations are nice and short, so I'll read it out. The council notes the operating results for the 4 months ending 31 October 2020. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? I will move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Peters. Councillors, as you'll be aware, the financial reporting is in the same format that we've had for many, many years, and showing the operating results to date. And clearly in the first quarter of the year, there are some positive things that I would like to highlight. One being that it's in the capital projects report. I'll talk about that in the next item. The financial report. So yes, I'll take it as being read. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's all.
Yes, Your Worship, some really good reporting here, but it's far too early in the year to make too much comment, but on page 87, which showed all the negative time and all the negative talk about COVID, we see our development contribution are up $4 million. And we also see our finance costs are down $2.5 million, so there are some swings and roundabouts a bit here. But we actually have an extra $7.7 million that come in during that time, so it's important to recognise both sides of the debate when we go into things like this. So it's really good. It's really good we've got confidence in our developers to come to Bombara.
Any further discussion? Councillor Cockburn.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify, page 96, which it actually, again, this is just retrospective and just to make sure that the internal borrowing is still sitting at 35 million, according to the figures there at the bottom. So this is not, when we look at the chart above, we're looking at the external debt. We don't include the internal borrowing from ourselves in that chart.
In actual fact, internal funding is 69.7 million.
Sorry, I was removing off the water reserve. My apologies. So just for clarification, that is correct.
Any further discussion? I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 8.2, the capital projects report for October 2020, and the recommendation is that council notice the capital projects report for all 4 months. I'll move and Councillor Deeming is moving and I'll second it. So this is progress on the capital projects that we are achieving, and it's great to see that the capital expenditure is tracking well. We hope that that continues. Clearly at this time of the year where we've spent 26% of the overall budget compared with 19% spending of our capital budget at this time last financial year. So I think that shows that there's probably a combination of the fact that we've got PGF projects, we've got our team have had time through COVID lockdown to actually get documents prepared and out to the market, and that the contractors are itching to go and actually do some of the work for the benefit of our people. So that was the thing that I really wanted to highlight in the capital projects report. That's it.
No, you're simple.
Any further discussion?
Just one glaring obvious thing. We wouldn't want to have a civil defence emergency at the moment, because up until now, this year we haven't spent $1. We've spent nothing, according to this.
Whereabouts are you on the...
Page 101, halfway, middle of the page. Actual year to date, 0.
Oh, for the, throughout the... I can speak to that just based on the work that's programmed for replacement of tsunami sirens and signs and all that's in there. That's programmed, but it just hasn't happened in this quarter.
Through the Chair, all the budgets are phased. In this case, there is no budget spend to date. It's for later on in the year.
Yeah. There are budgets, but no expenditure. I know that Council Holmes understands that.
You can only go with the information provided to councils in our agenda papers.
Councillor Collins?
Yeah, I know, even though, and I'm similar kind of respect to Councillor Holtz, and civil defence is a huge priority. I do know from the past year, prior to me being in council, a lot of tsunami signage went up around the district, because the recreation services team was putting it up. And I do know that the civil defence team is also monitoring and wanting to do as much as they possibly can to get new sirens out, but at the same time they've also got personal units that you can install in your own house that you can use if you are out of the area that you cannot hear them. But they do want to improve what they have already. So it's something that's on my mind, but I understand why it's currently not there.
Councillor Peters.
Just so that I understand it, I'm looking at the sealed roads extensions. So you budgeted some sealed road extensions, but in fact you did some house frontage sealing, which is very important because of the dust, but that wasn't budgeted. Is that what, am I reading that right? That or did you transfer it over? Yeah.
I can't comment on the
Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. I wanted to check to see whether there was another 233 that's going to be sealed, or whether the house frontages were the total of what was going to be sealed in this budget.
The budget for the full year is just shy of $4 million.
Right, so there's a lot to go.
On the very right hand side.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's something that we can cover in the infrastructure agenda as well, just a bit more detail on that.
They could be conflated, those figures, so that they...
Just for clarification, 104, page 104, which talks about the capital project expenditure, and it talks about the budget. In previous years, we've had a very large carry forwards. I'm not seeing that here. So does that mean that the staff are actually getting on top of all the work that's programmed?
The forecast is certainly for fewer carry forwards, which is something that we've been focusing on. Let's hope that by the end of the year that comes to fruition. But yeah, there's definitely a strong focus on that to sort of reduce over time and carry forwards. Alan's got something to add.
Through the chair, I definitely concur that a lot of the energy is going into getting contracts out early. As you mentioned earlier, a lot of planning is taking place prior to the construction season starting, so good to have it. However, we are now seeing supply chain issues coming through, whether it's consumer goods or engineering materials that maybe for one small part can have put a whole project on hold. That's totally outside our control. It's going to be a national issue. I know a lot of shipping firms have dropped New Zealand off their schedules. While they used to come right through from Europe or Asia through to Australia and New Zealand, they're now stopping in Australia. And now we're on additional service out of Australia to get goods into New Zealand. If you try and buy a fridge now, you have trouble for some models, for example. So we're going to see more and more of this over the next 12 months kind of being a factor in everything we do as an organisation, as individuals.
On that, through you, Madam Chair, it's something that will be affecting the whole of New Zealand, not just accommodate. And I'm pretty certain that the Northland residents are quite resourceful and able to find alternative solutions if they're given the opportunity. Will they be given the opportunity to find other resources or other opportunities to get jobs done, or will we just be expecting to follow the contract as per it is written?
I'm sure we'll be looking through chess, we'll be looking for alternatives as long as they meet the quality of the finished job we're trying to achieve. We won't be cutting corners.
I don't think we need to get smart. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. Item 8.3, Conway District Airport Annual Report and Performance Summary. Just to clarify that we have slightly different recommendations to what's printed in the agenda. So the draft financial statements have not received final audit clearance at the time of the meeting. The staff are working through queries surrounding performance measures and the most appropriate reporting of these within the financial statements. I would like to have that aspect of it recorded in the minutes. And as I say, the recommendations, the motion will be different. The council will see so you will have the alternate recommendation on your desks, hopefully. And Councillor Deming has put their hand up to move those recommendations. And Councillor Martin is seconding that. Councillor Deming.
Thank you. I think you've already taken words out of my mouth, Your Worship. I was going to make that explanation, but if anybody wants further information on that, I'll refer them to Delise, bearing in mind that Council is the board for the District Airport. And we've actually done remarkably well considering where we expected to be post-COVID and where we actually are. I think the airport has managed remarkably. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Popolo?
Through you, Madam Chair, I actually want to congratulate the staff for they predicted what they said that they were going to do and what they are actually doing. The figures are higher, is mostly because Northland has been theoretically COVID-free to allow more people to travel north and travel on the aeroplanes, which is well done to the staff for keeping things clean and tidy at the airport and keeping all that in process.
Any further discussion? This will note the national carrier, of course, being in New Zealand and the impact that COVID-19 had on their operations, but also their confidence in the region and looking at the Northern Four Together meeting in Kaikoura. We had Tanya Robson talking to Tanya Burt, thank you, speaking to us about the future for the sort of visitor sector and noting that Air New Zealand were going to be increasing their schedule coming to the north beginning in December, recognising that people were going to be coming to and from our beautiful region. Hopefully there are sufficient beds around the region to be able to accommodate all these wonderful people, but they themselves are really confident of the future for our region, for the airline. And of course they are one of the biggest users of our runway facilities in the airport, and hopefully we can continue that. But of course this was reflecting on the year that ended in July. So Mike, did you want to add to that?
Sorry, through your worship. I just need to raise a point. We have received some information from audit in the last couple of days. Nothing to worry about. Frantically trying to get the report to us, and we do apologise for not having that final version for you today, hence the change in the recommendation. One of our target measures is the annual survey. For the record, that was normally conducted during April, which was during lockdown, and of course circumstances meant that when we were able to see some passenger numbers through the airport, they were quite low, so we did conduct a survey and had a very poor participation rate. On advice from audit, they've suggested that we record those not measured, and so we've agreed to that. Technically, we did the survey, we got the results, we met all the requirements, but statistically it was pretty insignificant. So nothing too major, but certainly that is one change that will be made as part of the final report.
Can't we push back and say the title was there? We didn't do the survey.
Choose your battles, I think.
Choose your battles.
We want it before the 30th, but push it back.
Councillor Murphy.
Just a comment that even though it's less than budgeted, it's good to see how much contribution the parking revenue added to the end-of-year budgets. So even though there were less people flying in and out compared to 2019, that actually really helped fill the coffers a little bit there. So that's a positive thing. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to note that the actual revenue for 2019 was 630,390. The actual revenue for this year is 627,024. I mean, despite the disrupted year, that's a remarkable result. Although our expenditure did go up, but that's the way it goes. Any further discussion? Want to reply, Councillor? No, thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Councillors, as I indicated earlier, for the extraordinary business, we do have 2 items that will be coming to us. Supplementary agenda issues, there will be 2 additional confidential reports, property matters for consideration. It does require a resolution of council to consider these reports, and so I need to do this in the open portion of the meeting. So I will read these fabulous words that have been something prepared earlier. Subject to the agenda being circulated, confidential items 1.4 and 1.5 property matters were distributed separately, but not within the time frame specified in the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act. Whangarei District Council Standing Orders 9.12 require a council resolution to deal with items of business that cannot be delayed. These items were not included in the agenda for the reasons that properties identified as being of strategic importance became available after the agenda closure. Council are asked to consider these items today at Council's meeting to give certainty to both vendors and Council around future property purchases. Can I have some? I will move that Council consider items 1.4 and 1.5 property matters at this meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Martin is seconding. And those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Now we need to move into the confidential part portion of our meeting.
I'll move it.
Councillor Coccarello is moving for the reasons that are stated in the agenda, and that will be seconded by Councillor Peters. I will put that motion. Those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So that does bring us to the end of the open portion of the meeting, so we will ask that our live streaming is concluded. It's farewell to trade, it's waving goodbye.